Okay, so our topic for the day is blood banking and basics of transfusion. So in continuation with hematology that you have been studying this month. So this session we have with us my senior, Dr. Indranidhi. She is assistant professor in the Department of Pathology, and Madam will also be telling you about most of the part that is there. So I'll introduce what are learning objectives for this session. So first we'll see what are the indications of blood transfusion. So then we'll see how the whole process is done, right, from the point of collection of sample, how it is stored, and how different components are produced from that stored blood. What are the changes that happen in the cells and the plasma once storage? What is the basis of the various reactions that can occur, and at the end we'll also see an overview of the complications that might occur, and processes, how is it done, all of this we'll see. So why do we need blood transfusion to start with? You had a class on blood grouping, right? So you must have some idea why we need to do blood transfusion. Yes? Why is it needed? What is your idea, blood transfusion?
Accident or by chance, because of any reason, we need to have any kind of blood transfusion.
Right, correct. So the most common thing that comes to our mind is when there is excessive blood loss, we need to transfuse blood. And for that same reason, I'll show you a brief snippet of the important milestones in its development. Why blood grouping is done. So that also is important. Okay, anything else? So what is, do you know what is the blood transfusion day or blood donor, International Blood Donor Day? Any idea? So we celebrate that on 14th June, right? Very correctly said. And worldwide, so this is to the amount of approximately 118 to 120 million units of blood that are donated, and the same put into clinical use, and the demand, it often is more than the amounts of blood units which are available, right? So it is a very important therapy in a lot of situations, and hence it's used so rampantly. Towards the end, we'll see what is the present approach with regard to blood transfusion. So with regard to the body, so why do we need transfusion of blood? So there can be two reasons. The first reason is we want to bring about some circulatory balance, right? So the example that he mentioned, when there is excessive blood loss, so the blood volume becomes less in that situation. So transfusion is done to serve as a medium of expanding the blood volume to bring about circulatory homeostasis. This is the first reason why transfusions are done. And second reason why we need to transfuse is oxygen carriage, because blood has hemoglobin, which is the main carrier of oxygen. Blood also transports oxygen in its dissolved state. So both of this are affected when there is loss of blood. So we want to either correct the oxygen delivery to the tissues, or we want to bring about some form of circulatory homeostasis. These are the two main reasons why transfusion is done. Now, I'll take you back to the important milestones in the development of this field. So 1628 was the year when an English physician, William Harvey, he discovered circulatory system, and how circulation works. So that was the breakthrough moment. So discovery of blood circulation. Over the next few decades, various other experiments were tried. So 1660s was a very important decade where you can see one more physician, Richard Lower, he tried transfusing blood from one dog to another dog, and he was able to demonstrate that dogs can be kept alive by transfusion. So animal to animal transfusions successfully done in that decade. Followed by this, animal to human transmission was also tried and reported to be successful, right? And within approximately 10 years, that is within the next decade, transfusing of blood becomes prohibited. Now this is an important thing. So experiment ke baad, when it was like they tried to do it at a little bit larger scale, so reactions which are anyway, because with the knowledge of blood grouping, you now know that human to human transmission also, you need to go through that process of blood grouping and matching, cross matching. So here we are talking of animal to human transmission. So reactions so much that within a decade it was prohibited by law. Okay, so over the next century they tried lot of other things. That milk was tried, saline was tried, limited success, not much of a breakthrough. In 1818, so we have an obstetrician this time, Dr. James Blundell. He performed the first successful transmission of human blood from another human. So to a patient who was undergoing postpartum hemorrhage. So in the process of childbirth, there are times when there is excessive loss of blood. Causes are many, you will eventually learn as you go through the course. One of the important causes of postpartum hemorrhage is when the uterus becomes atonic. They lose their normal, the muscles lose their normal contraction, normal tone. So the bleeding does not stop. And even to this date, if such a situation arises, transfusions are routinely done for this complication. So in such a case, the doctor tried transfusing blood from the patient's husband, right? By holding the arm above and then transfusing it below. So after that, within the next decade or so, around 10 transfusions were tried on similar lines, out of which half of them were successful and they were published. So this was the first documented human to human transfusion. And the next important landmark was the discovery of the blood grouping system. So Karl Landsteiner, so on whose day we actually have that World Blood Donation Day, 14th June. So he discovered 3 blood groups, A, B and C. C was later changed to O, and his colleagues then gave the second one, the last one, blood group O. 1939 he also discovered the rhesus blood group. So these are the blood groups we talk about, ABO system and RH system. 2 systems we talk about because of their potency to cause transfusion reactions. But apart from this, there are a lot of other blood grouping systems also, named on the basis of the antigens. MNA system is one, Levy system is one, KID, Duffy, all of these are different systems. But these are important because of their, as I said, ability to cause transfusion-related incompatibility reactions. And blood banking as a process, it developed when the World Wars started. So there are a lot of injury, lot of blood loss, lot of trauma, which of course required a lot of blood to be transfused to save lives. So that is when this whole process gained momentum and blood banking was established as a full-fledged system. 1937 was the time when the first hospital-based blood bank was started, right? It is in Chicago, and this is how it looks in the present day. In India also, you can look at the date, the World War II around 1942, in All India Institute of Public Health, Kolkata, it was started by Indian Red Cross Society, right? So these things are still there. So it is actually a war which has given momentum to this whole process. So with this history now, let us see in present day at least, what are the indications where blood transfusion is done. So acute blood loss, when more than 30% of the blood volume is lost, we have to transfuse blood. Now some of it can be expected. So if we have expected surgery, elective surgery for some reason, a blood loss can be expected. So as a part of the pre-operative checklist, we need to arrange cross-matched blood, which will be transfused in the process of surgery. This is an elective thing. Emergency situations may be, you might need to transfuse blood depending on the amount of blood loss. Postpartum hemorrhage that I was talking about, it is an emergency. So lot of transmissions go into this particular factor. Accidents can also result in blood loss, and cancer patients. So because in some of the cancers, if it is a carcinoma of the hematological tissue of the blood cells, so it definitely the counts of the blood will be affected. So, and you by this time you know that RBC, WBC, platelets, they all have their own functions. So if the count of one is affected, suppose if there is too much production of WBCs, the bone marrow space available for the others will be affected. So they will, these cases will not only have anemia, they will also have lesser platelets, predisposing them to bleeding, right? So blood loss can occur like this in cancer patients, then you need to transfuse blood. I'll give you one more perspective. So we need to try various forms of cytotoxic drugs in the course of treating cancers. We need to try radiotherapy. Like these are all very specific, but broadly the therapies that we try in cancers, their sole purpose is to destroy that carcinomatous tissue or the cells. And in that process, some normal cells also get affected, right? So chemotherapy ho, radiotherapy ho, if the tissues in the bone marrow, if they're affected, so blood counts will be less. So that can also lead to bleeding. So these are the common indications when there is blood loss, we need to transfuse blood. This scenario is in case of anemia. So because we talked of oxygen carriage, so RBCs are the ones which are carrying oxygen. So in anemia, if the hemoglobin is less than 7 gram %, so there you need to transfuse blood, but this time we'll prefer to transfuse RBCs only, right, rather than the whole blood. If RBCs are not available, then we go for the whole blood thing. When the patient is also a patient of heart disease, right, any form of cardiovascular morbidity, so the cutoff then becomes 8 gram %. So we start the transfusion a bit earlier, so threshold is lesser. Then symptomatic anemia. So anything anemia along with shortness of breath, dizziness, heart failure, and decreased exercise tolerance. You need to consider transfusing blood. And hereditary disorders. So I've given two examples here. Hemophilia, which will predispose to blood loss. Thalassemia is a form of anemia. So here, these are things which will keep on occurring again and again, right? So there you need to transfuse blood. And as I said, it is better to transfuse the RBCs in these cases, because repeatedly if you also transfuse the whole blood, so that will also have the extra fluid, right? So that can have its own effect. So madam will be touching on this, extra things which can happen. Platelets. So wherever there is thrombocytopenia or a defect of platelet function defects, we prefer to transfuse platelets. Cryoprecipitate and factor concentrates. So in conditions where clotting factors are less or deficient, so these things are used. And exchange transfusion. So this is a transfusion modality which is used in hemolytic disease of the newborn. So one condition that I have already studied where HDN occurs is in RH incompatibility, right? Now this is a chart which shows that accepted transmission triggers, right? So transfusion triggers. So this is a concept which tells us that below this point you have to consider transfusion. So it's around, you can see 7 to 8 mostly. Now by and large these are the indications, but it is not only the value of hemoglobin that we go through, but what is the condition of the patient. So along that is a very important player in deciding when we start transfusion. So at what level of hemoglobin should we start? So not only we go with the transfusion triggers, but we take the clinical condition of the patient at present into consideration. So these are the different indications of blood transfusion. I'll hand over the session to madam to continue the rest.
And basics of transfusion today. So you already have an idea about how to do blood grouping, what are the blood groups, and some of the important indications of a blood transfusion. So tell me, what is the universal donor blood group? O positive. And universal recipient? Very good. So for first 10-15 minutes, we'll learn about blood collection. So when I say safe blood donation, what does it incorporates? So what are the factors should be fulfilled to say that we have done a safe blood donation? So safe blood donation will not only ensure the safety of the recipient, but also we must ensure that the donor is also safe, right? Then we should take all the necessary steps to prevent any blood donation complications. Complication for the donor and most importantly complication for the recipient, because the patient is already in a dire situation. That's why we are giving him blood. Now we must ensure that he is not suffering extra from any blood donation reactions. Then whenever we are collecting blood from the donor, we need to maintain the quality of the collected blood. Otherwise it is of no use. We cannot transfer this donated blood to a recipient. So we must ensure that the blood that we have collected from the donor, as well as whatever components we are making from the donated blood, we have kept it safe. And lastly, again, reduce collection related complications to the donor. So for donor eligibility criteria, donor must be of age 18 to 65 years. He or she should weigh more than 55 kgs and hemoglobin more or less more than 12.5. And the donor, the vitals of the donor like his or her blood pressure, pulse rate, temperatures, all these things should be normal before we are referring him for a donation. And no high risk behavior or recent illnesses. Some of the medical history that we must screen before we are selecting a donor are any past medical problems, like he or she might have any past cardiac problem or any recent infection. So he will naturally become ineligible for being the donor. Okay. Then any recent vaccinations. So for all the vaccinations, some time slots are there. Some of the vaccinations they cannot donate blood within next 2 months, 3 months. Or sometimes some immunocompromised patients, like someone has done a kidney transplantation, they cannot donate blood. Someone has suffered from cancer long back and they have received chemotherapy, so they cannot give blood transfusion. Then any previous donation reactions. So some of the person, he is willing to give blood, but whenever we are taking his history, if he or she says that last year I also tried to give blood, but then I experienced some of the complications like high heart rate or very low blood pressure, so that will also naturally become ineligibility criteria. So we will not take blood from that person. Then a bit of general physical examination we will do on the patient, whether pallor is there, icterus, that is jaundice is there, these things, then pulse rate normal or not, blood pressure normal or not, any recent infections he is having, chest clear or not. So all these things we will see. One extra test also we perform, the hemoglobin test. So bedside test by copper sulfate or by HemoQ method. So we will at least know that the blood hemoglobin concentration, whether it is more than 12.5 or less than 12.5. So if it is less, then first we need to treat the donor. He is not in a position to give blood to others. So some of the type of blood bags, it can be single, double, triple or quadruple bags. So CPDA, CPD, these are additive that I will discuss in subsequent slides. Then the needle gauge that we will use for collecting the blood is either 16G or 17G. And then there will be integrated tubings to collect the blood because we want to avoid any septic reactions. So some pre-collection preparation for the donor. So he or she should be well rested for at least 10 to 15 minutes before we are having him for blood donation. Then we must explain him the procedure, because all the first time donors, they can be a little anxious. Some of them might be that in their lifetime they have not given even the blood samples, but they are willing to do blood donation. So first we explain the procedure to them, that what we are intending to do. Then whoever phlebotomist is there, they will select his antecubital vein in which arm, in left arm or right arm. Okay, so after that, we'll clean that area with antiseptic and then we'll start collecting the blood. Definitely we must use sterile blood bag and which has vacuum so that once blood is starting pouring, so it flows freely into the blood bag. Then venipuncture with 16G or 17G. So usually the collection is done for 350 or 450 ml approx. And in between the collection process, we will monitor the donor continuously whether he is feeling any vertigo, any weakness, any sort of reaction. So we need to calm down the donor also and keep checking in between whether he or she is feeling any discomfort. And blood is collecting in the blood bag. So after every 30 seconds, we need to gently mix the blood bag also. So one shaker is usually available that will continuously shake very mildly that bag so that the blood is mixed properly with the anticoagulant that is present in the blood bag. So we are collecting the blood, we don't want that blood to get coagulated. So gentle mixing is done. So usually simple shaker is available at the collection place. Then during collection, what we will monitor for the donor, if he or she is feeling sweating, dizziness, in between we must check the flow of the blood that is entering into the blood bag, whether the tubings are working fine and blood is coming into the bag, and mix the bag every 30 seconds. After completion of collection, we'll clamp and remove the needle, apply pressure dressing, whatever we do during any blood sampling also we are doing like that. So we'll press gently so that, because the needle is a bit bigger, what we use during blood collection for any blood test. The needle that we use for collecting from a donor, that is a bit big. So then we will weigh the bag, the blood collected bag to know that whether the required amount of blood has been collected, and then seal the tubing and prepare the whole blood for next component separation. Post-donation care, so the donor will receive fluid and some snacks usually. So any of you has given blood? How many of you has given blood? None? Okay, so hopefully in the next donation program in this college itself, you can start by donating blood. But then be sure whether you are eligible or not. So before any blood collection, blood donation program is scheduled, you better check your hemoglobins, whether you are eligible or not. So then we'll advise the donor to avoid any strenuous exercise for next 24 hours, and we'll also advise him to take enough water, because we have taken 350 or 450 ml of blood from him, no? So he might be suffering from a bit liquid deficiency, so better to maintain his hydration for next 24 hours. Then we have collected the blood in the blood bag. We have ensured that the anticoagulated, whatever is in the bag, it is mixed nicely. We have sealed it. Then we should do proper labeling. The unique donor ID number should be written in the bag. Then collection date and time. So all these things must be labeled before transfusion itself. But after donation also, we must inquire if all these things are done perfectly. The unique donor ID number, then collection date and time is also very important. Why it is important to write the collection date and time? Any one of you? Why do you think it is important? Does it matter if I have written that whether I have taken it on 6th of December or 8th of December or 16th of December? Why? Very good, very good. So all these blood bags, they will have a certain amount of days validity. So validity will usually depend which anticoagulation we are using in the bag. Then after component separation, which component is in which bag. So I will discuss in later slides. Some of the components are viable for a very less period of time. Some of the components with the help of anticoagulant are viable for a long time, for 35 days, 42 days. So for counting the days, we need the collection date and time. Then blood group and donor details. So after collecting the blood, so definitely we'll test the blood that which group does this blood belong to. Then all these things should be written very appropriately and very neatly, so that anyone coming after, any technician or doctor seeing the blood bag, they just after seeing, they understand that at which date the blood was collected, what is the component here, what is the blood group here. So some of the donor complications, usually very rare. So sometimes they might feel vasovagal attack, or some hematoma might form from the area where we have collected blood, nausea, vomiting. They can experience arm pain for a few days after donation. So in any area of health and medical sciences, quality control is very important. So in this quality control in blood collection, so we should maintain all the procedures, the sterility should be maintained. So before inserting the needle, we must sanitize that area. Then whoever is handling the blood bags, they must wash their hands nicely. So sterility maintenance is very needed. And bag storage and expiry checks, this should also be done meticulously. Calibration of the weighing scale, because the weighing scale we are measuring how much amount of blood we have taken. It should be in between 400-450 ml. So if that weighing machine is at fault, then we are never sure that whether we have collected the required amount of blood. Because otherwise, when we are separating the components from that whole blood, we will have difficulty. We will not get enough number of cells that we intend to get. And then record verification. So continuously, all these records should be verified by a concerned person. Some of the infection control practices, like any other procedure, hand hygiene, use of gloves, then disposal of the sharp needles in the correct places. You have had class on biomedical waste management, right? Biomedical waste. You have class in foundation course, na? So all these, yellow bag, blue bags, white bags for, blue bags for sharp containers, I think. So all white for sharp. So all these things should be maintained during the blood collection procedure. So take home message from this topic is, safe donor selection is essential. So our main motto is to treat the recipient. So we need blood, but we must not forget is donor is also a human, right? So recipient is important as well as donor is also important to us. So some of us must ensure that he or she is eligible to give the blood. After that only we will insert the needle. Correct technique ensures quality of blood. So all these procedures should be, so donor should be screened for any prior medical illnesses. Then the needle should be used correctly. The blood collection bag should be not of expiry date. It should not prolong the expiry date. Weighing machine should be correct, that we are taking the adequate amount of blood. And proper monitoring prevents complications for donor. And documentation should always be done very meticulously so that we can maintain the quality control. So we'll go to the second section, that is storage of blood and changes during storage and its consequent effects. So we'll learn about what are the principles of blood storage and storage conditions for each blood components, biochemical and morphological changes during storage lesions and its clinical relevance, and how these changes after affect transfusion outcomes. So what is the need for blood storage? So tell some of the needs. Why do we need to store blood? Because every time the recipient will not be available, no? But we must ensure whenever the recipient needs the blood, we can provide them the blood. Availability during emergencies. We don't know when emergency will come. Allows component separation. So if we have enough amount of whole blood, then we can think of component separation, how much PRBC we need, how much platelets we need from that whole blood. And whenever there is any emergency, we are ready with our blood bags. Improves resource utilization. So if we store it, So sometimes, let's say we are storing it here, but then from some other hospitals in Agartala, we are receiving one request. They don't have it, but we have it, so we can supply to them that component of the blood. Supports large-scale transfusion services. So in any hospitals where there is ICU, where there is emergencies, so anytime emergencies can happen on a mass scale. So if we don't have enough storage in our blood bank, we can never meet the needs whenever any emergency is happening. So some storage conditions according to what component of blood we are talking about. So for whole blood storage conditions, temperature maintained is 2 to 6 degree. It should be at least more than 1 degree centigrade. And anticoagulants used are CPD, CPDA. So what does CPD stands for? Citrate, dextrose, phosphate and adenine. So each of the component have one function. So citrate is mainly used for anticoagulation. So in the blood bag I told now that some of the blood bag will have some additives compared to what we need to store. So for RBCs we are using usually CPD or CPDA. So that citrate used, so that will prevent clotting of the blood. So it is basically an anticoagulant. So whenever we are collecting whole blood, or let's say from whole blood we are separating packed red blood cells, we need this anticoagulant. Otherwise all the RBCs, they will get clotted. Then phosphate, it acts as a buffer. It maintains the pH. Dextrose will provide energy, will provide glucose to the red blood cells. And adenine, it will increase ATP synthesis and it will increase the shelf life of RBCs. So after component separation in a blood bag, if we are adding CPD as a anticoagulant, then the validity of that blood bag is 35 days. But once we add adenine in this, because adenine is a source of ATP, so that shelf life will increase from 35 days to 42 days. So we need, for storage, we need longer time period. So if it is available, then CPDA is a better anticoagulant for the collected blood, because it will increase the shelf life from 35 days to 42 days. 21 days and 35 days. For 42 days, another anticoagulant is there. So when we are using CPD, it is 21 days. When we are adding adenine with CPD, it is increased from 21 days to 35 days. And we cannot store these whole blood or PRBCs below 1 degree centigrade, because then RBC will get hemolyzed. Then there is no point of storing these whole blood or RBCs if my RBCs are hemolyzed. So for RBC concentrate, Sagum or Exol is used. So for Sagum, the components are saline, adenine, glucose and mannitol. So one mannitol is extra here. So this acts as an osmotic stabilizer and it will reduce the chances of RBC hemolysis. So all these basically are additives that we add into the blood bag whenever we are collecting it from the donor. In the blood bag itself, all these things will be added. And that Exol is adenine, dextrose, saline and mannitol. Mannitol is present in Exol. It again reduces the hemolysis. So for RBC storage, the temperature is 2 to 6. So for whole blood and RBCs, the temperature conditions are more or less same. What different is what anticoagulant or what additive we are using. So if it is CPD, then only 21 days. If it is CPDA, then 35 days. And if it is Sagum and Exol, then it is 42 days. So it is more prolonged. And avoid freezing unless glycerolized. So if someone wishes to store the blood for 10 years, then we can keep these PRBCs in minus 65 degrees centigrade and we can use it for next 10 years anytime. For platelet storage, many things are different from WBC, from whole blood and from PRBCs. Platelet is different, quite different. So the major striking two differences, first one is in temperature. So for whole blood and PRBCs, we have seen 2 to 6 degrees centigrade. But platelets we can store in 20 to 24 degree. So what will happen to RBCs if they are stored at 20 degree? So I told no, it should not be less than 1 degree. By chance, if someone mistakenly stored in 20 degree, then what will happen to RBCs? Hemolyzed. So they will get hemolyzed. So no use of that RBC storing. For platelets, 20 to 24 degree is the criteria. And platelets must be stored with continuous agitation. Continuous agitation means continuous very mild shaking. So there are shakers. So we need to keep the platelet bag upon that shaker. So it will continuously agitate the platelet bags. And the temperature 20 to 24 is basically in room temperature. And shelf life is very low, 5 to 7 days. So many researchers has tried that if after adding any additive or anticoagulant, if we can store the platelet for longer days, but no use, because platelet storage shelf life is only for 5 to 7 days. And risk of bacterial contamination is highest among this platelet concentrate. This also we must remember. So that's why whenever from any blood bag we are component separation we are doing for platelets, their collection time is very, very important, because after 5 days, if we are transferring this platelet to one patient who is in need of platelets, we are introducing many bacterial infections to him or her. So we are doing bad actually to the recipient. So we must practice very meticulously that the platelet I am giving, whether it is in between the shelf life or not, whether it is in between 5 days, 7 days or not. Okay? Then fresh frozen plasma. So fresh frozen plasma means here all the coagulation factors are present in the fresh frozen plasma. It is also in 30 degree or lower, and shelf life is 1 year. Minus 30 degree, sorry, it is very cold. And then before use, we must thaw the FFP in 30 to 37 degree just before use. So how do we thaw it? So there are some dedicated machines, or sometimes water bath is there. So some small container is there, water is there. So with electricity, that water will have a temperature of 37 degree. So we can keep that blood bag of the FFP into that water bath and then thaw it before use, 30 to 37 degrees. So 30 to 37 degrees is basically body temperature most of the time. So before giving it to the patient, we must ensure that temperature has come down from minus 30, it has come up to 30 to 37 degree. After that only we must introduce it to the recipient. For cryoprecipitate also similar to as FFPs only. This is also some of the coagulation factors like fibrinogen, these things only stay in cryoprecipitate. So they are also, the storage temperature is minus 30 degree and shelf life is 1 year. It contains fibrinogen, von Willebrand factor and factor 8, and this cryoprecipitate also must be thawed at 30 to 37 degree before introducing into recipient. Now what are storage lesion? So storage lesion means biochemical and morphological changes that occur in the blood components during storage of blood. So even after we are ensuring that we have added additives or anticoagulants, even after that also some of the storage lesions will appear. So there will be some biochemical changes in the blood components or some morphological changes. So these storage lesions will affect RBC viability. So it will try to reduce RBC viability. So whatever 21 days, 35 days or 42 days it is supposed to be viable, but it will reduce RBC viability. And then it will automatically reduce oxygen delivery. So why are we giving the blood transfusion? So basically to increase the oxygen delivery. So if my RBCs are not viable, they cannot transfer the oxygen. Their oxygen carrying capacity will automatically reduce. Then there is chance that some wrong immune response will happen and we are stuck with some of the transfusion complications. That also I'll discuss in subsequent slides. And some electrolyte balance might occur. So most important electrolyte imbalance involves potassium in a given blood transfusion. So some of the important biochemical changes in stored RBCs are reduced ATP levels. So ATP is the major source of energy after glucose. So ATP levels will reduce, then reduction in 2,3-DPG levels that will increase the oxygen affinity thereby reducing the oxygen release to the tissues. Increase potassium leakage into plasma, increase lactate and reduce pH. So reduce pH means the recipient after receiving that blood might experience acidosis, that is again a life-threatening condition. So all these changes are expected more or less to happen in the stored RBCs. So what will be the morphological changes? RBC membrane will become rigid, loss of membrane lipids. So usually the RBCs are biconcave shape, but then when there are loss of membrane lipids, the shape of RBCs will change from biconcave to echinocyte. Reduced RBC deformability. So in a normal given situation, RBCs are expected to deform a bit according to the need of the vessels. But in a storage blood, this capacity of the RBC will reduce. Increased chances of hemolysis, and the consequence of all these changes will be reduced survival. The RBC that was supposed to be viable for, let's say, 21 days, maybe after 10 or 12 days will lose its efficiency. Some of the biochemical changes in plasma. So we talk about RBC, then we have the plasma. So the clotting factors might reduce. So the earliest clotting factors to reduce in the storage is factor 5 and factor 8. Ammonia might increase cytokines with prolonged storage and increased free irons. So many biochemical and morphological changes are expected to happen in the RBCs as well as in the plasma once we store the blood. And all these changes are termed as storage lesions. Platelet storage also will cause some issues with platelets, like reduced platelet aggregation, reduced pH due to lactate accumulation, and higher risk of bacterial proliferation. If you remember, which blood component has the highest risk of bacterial contamination? That is platelet. For platelet, the storage temperature is also different. It is 20 to 24 degree, and the shelf life is also very low. It's only 5 to 7 days. WBC also some changes may be there, like increased release of cytokines, enzymes. So all these cytokines later will cause reactions in the recipient, like febrile non-hemolytic reactions that we'll discuss in the complication topic today. Some electrolyte changes, I told you, the major electrolyte change will happen in potassium. So potassium will get released into the tissues. So that's why potassium will increase, because more potassium is getting released. So in significantly stored blood, so it will increase. And it is particularly dangerous in neonates, in massive transfusion or in exchange transfusion, and in renal disease patients, because the CKD patients, chronic kidney disease patients, they are already susceptible to have increased potassium. So increased potassium is termed as hyperkalemia, okay, and low potassium is termed as hypokalemia. So chronic kidney disease patients, they already have an increased chance of developing hyperkalemia. By chance, if we are introducing them to a major amount of storage blood, the chances are more that he or she will develop hyperkalemia. And hyperkalemia is very dangerous to life. So it can give rise to ventricular arrhythmias, many cardiac complications. It can even cause sudden death also. So for neonates, we tend to use fresh blood, more fresh blood. For exchange transfusion, that I will also discuss in subsequent slides, exchange transfusion also we should ensure that we are using fresh blood, because in exchange transfusion, we are using a major chunk of blood. It's not only one pint like 450 ml or 350 ml. Exchange transfusion means body's full blood we are exchanging. So it's approx 3 liter or 4 liter. So there we should ensure that we are using fresh blood. So what can be the consequent clinical effects of all these storage lesions? Reduced RBC survival that will lead to impaired oxygen delivery to the tissues, hyperkalemia that can be life-threatening, increased risk of transfusion reaction, because in a stored blood, all the WBCs will keep secreting cytokines, and these cytokines are actually responsible for febrile non-hemolytic reactions in a recipient. And reduced coagulation factor efficiency. The earliest coagulation factor to reduce in the stored blood is factor 5 and factor 8. So let's say some patient of factor VIII deficiency is there and we want to give him plasma, factor frozen plasma or something. But if it is stored for a prolonged period of time, the factor level is low in that stored plasma. So the efficacy will automatically reduce. How can we minimize the storage lesion? So use of additive solutions that I told, CPD is there, CPDA1 is there, SAGM, SAGM is there, Exol is there. So use of additive solution. Then leukoreduction. What is leukoreduction? So there are some filters. So whenever we are storing blood or RBC, whole blood or RBCs or even platelets, so there are some filters that will reduce the amount of WBC. So if we can reduce the amount of WBC in the stored blood, so the subsequent amount of cytokines that are supposed to release from WBCs will also be automatically reduced. So this leukoreduction, so all these things are very hi-fi things that are available in very advanced centers who are storing blood for a long time. So leukodepletion. Then some reservation solutions that can restore ATP, 2,3-DPG that can also be used in addition to additives to the blood bags. And prefer fresh blood that I already told. For neonatal exchange transfusion, we should always prefer fresh blood. Neonatal exchange transfusion is needed for hemolytic disease of newborn. You must have read recently in your physiology, na? Hemolytic disease of newborns, where the newborn will have a very high level of bilirubins due to maternal antibodies that are transferring through the placenta. So their exchange transfusion is needed. So we must ensure that we are exchanging him with a fresh blood in massive transfusions or in cardiac and ICU patients. So take home message from this topic are: blood undergoes predictable biochemical and morphological changes during storage. So we know that what are the changes that are supposed to happen when we are storing the blood for a long time. And these changes are collectively known as storage lesion. Understanding these changes help ensure safe and effective transfusion. So you have the background knowledge now. So if sometimes in your later clinical years, so there are two options. So one is stored blood, one is fresh blood, and there are two candidates. So one is a neonatal exchange transfusion candidate, another one, let's say a young female who due to some road traffic accident is in need of RBCs now. So fresh blood you will give to which person? You will issue to neonate. Very good. So the fresh blood you will issue to neonatal exchange transfusion, and the lady in question, she might get that a bit stored blood also. So by that you need to prioritize that which candidate should be given preference for which blood component. And mitigation strategies to reduce adverse effects, like one major advance is leukoreduction that I told you. So by the use of leukocyte filters, so the amount of WBC is present in a platelet concentrate or RBC concentrate is reduced drastically, so that we can prevent the subsequent complications. So third one, right now? Okay. So the third topic is component separation and its uses. What is component separation? So it is a process of dividing whole blood into its individual components so that one donation can treat or save multiple recipients. So we'll collect the whole blood from a donor. Then if we do components separation, we can give the advantage to multiple patients who are in need. So we know that whole blood contains RBCs, WBCs, platelets and plasma. Different patients will require different components, and one unit of whole blood can treat multiple patients, and modern transfusion practice focuses on evidence-based targeted therapies. So we don't want to waste the whole blood giving it to one patient. So from one whole blood we can make PRBCs, that is packed red blood cell concentrations. We can make FFP, that is fresh frozen plasma. We can make platelet concentrates. Also, we can make cryoprecipitate. So from one single blood donor, we can treat 3 or 4 multiple patients. Now, there are many limitations of whole blood. Basically, whole blood is not given nowadays because everywhere it is practiced to give components to the patients who are in need. So what are the limitations? They have short shelf life. There is high risk of circulatory overload because let's say one patient hemoglobin is dropping and they actually need the PRBCs, but by giving whole blood you are giving so many additional things to him, all the plasmas you are giving, so it will cause circulatory overload to the patient. Not all patients need all components, and there is wastage of plasma and platelets. Also there is increased chances of reactions also if we are giving whole blood. So component therapy is the standard nowadays. So evidence based component therapy. So this patient needs this component, we are giving him the required component only. We are not going to overload him with all the whole blood components. What are the advantages? Better utilization of 1 unit of blood, as I discussed already. Targeted therapy, only the needed component is transfused to the recipient. Reduce transfusion reaction, improve storage efficiency, and also reduce the risk of volume overload. So these things, what can be the components? It can be PRBC, it can be FFP, it can be platelet, it can be cryoprecipitate. So more or less by two procedures, we can do the component separation. One is centrifugation and another is apheresis. So in centrifugation is used most commonly. For apheresis, it should be an advanced center. So in centrifugation, it can be a soft spin or can be a hard spin. So what happens in soft spin? So we are taking from a donor 450 ml of whole blood with anticoagulant, whatever we are using, be it CPD or be it CPDA. So in the soft spin means light spin. So in 1500 to 2000 RPM. So have you seen any centrifuge? Not yet. So later you will see centrifuge. The centrifuge you use in your labs will be quite different from the centrifuge we use in blood banks. That is much bigger. So for soft spin, the RPM set will be 1500 to 2000 for 10 minutes. So there will be 3 layers in the blood bag. There will be 3 layers after it has given soft spin. So the top layer will have PRP, that is platelet rich plasma. The second layer, the middle layer will be buffer coat, and the lowest layer will be of packed RBCs that are lightly packed. So after that, from here we are getting PRP in the top layer, we are getting PRP, the platelet rich plasma. Then this platelet rich plasma is collected for platelet preparation. So in that platelet rich plasma segment, we'll separate it and take it in another bag. Then we'll introduce hard spin to that bag. So for hard spin, we'll set the centrifuge speed in 3500 to 5000 RPM, and we will spin it for 10 to 15 minutes. So after that, what we get from the platelet rich plasma, there again we'll get 2 levels. So the first upper part, there will be platelet poor plasma, and all the platelets, because they are heavy, they will get concentrated in the bottom. So the platelet concentrate we are getting in the bottom layer. Then the final components that are obtained after both the spins. So we got packed red blood cells. From soft spin, lowest level was packed red blood cells. Platelet concentrate, so whole blood, first it is done soft spin, after that it is done hard spin. So after hard spin, in the lower level we are getting platelet concentrate. And then fresh frozen plasma from the platelet poor plasma. So here from top layer platelet poor plasma, we are getting fresh frozen plasma, and in the bottom layer we are finding platelet concentrate. And the cryoprecipitate is always optional. So you remember in fresh frozen plasma, so all the coagulation factors that are present in plasma will be there. And cryoprecipitate is more confined. It is taken from the fresh frozen plasma, which mostly have 3 clotting factors, that is fibrinogen, von Willebrand factor and factor 8. So by this way, by centrifugation technique, we can separate many blood components. Next, go to apheresis. So apheresis meaning is automated blood collection technique. So there is one automated big machine where only one required component is taken and the rest is returned to the donor in the same setting. Like from patient's one arm, we will take whole blood. So this whole blood will go into a big machine. So if we intend to take platelet from that whole blood, on the machine will do the settings. The machine will only take platelet concentration, and rest of the things except platelet will again be returned to the donor in the same setting. So when we want to take platelet, it is termed as platelet pheresis. So in that big machine, we will we'll do the setting that will intend that we only want platelet from the whole blood. Then we can take plasma, it will be termed as plasma pheresis. We can take only WBCs, and we can as well as take only RBCs. So that's why I told that it is usually practiced in advanced centers. So it is named as apheresis technique. Now again, these are already been discussed. Indications of packed red blood cells are chronic anemia or any acute blood loss, or any surgeon or gynecologist, they are planning any elective surgery. So before surgery they know that the patient is having low hemoglobin. So them also PRBCs is indicated. For indication of platelets, so for platelets there are two types of platelets. One is random donor platelets, one is single donor platelets. So what happens in random donor platelets? So these are prepared from whole blood. So I told you, after soft spin, then hard spin, we get platelet concentrate. That platelet concentrate is termed as RDP, that is random donor platelets. By apheresis and the single donor plasma, these are only prepared by apheresis from a single donor. So for RDPs, what will happen? Let's say I got 5 blood donations. From 5 persons, I took 5 platelet concentrate. Then I will combine these 5 platelet concentrations and I will make the random donor platelet. Why I need to combine? Because in RDP, in random donor platelets, it contains 5.5 into 10 to the power, approx 5000 platelets, while one SDP, one single donor plasma, contains more platelet, around 30,000 platelets. So whatever whole blood we are collecting, 450 ml, from that 450 ml, whenever I am doing soft spin and hard spin and I am collecting platelet, it is in very low concentration. Being donor, at one point of time, I cannot collect more than 450 ml of blood, otherwise the donor will faint. So for that very minimal amount of platelet I have collected. So that's why I need to combine 4 or 5 random donor patients. After that only the minimum criteria, that is 5000 or 6000 platelets I have got. But if we do it by apheresis technique, because that is a single donor, but that is an automated machine which is ensuring that the patient is not having, the donor is not having any complications. In that donor machine, blood is going through the automated machine. Only platelet we are collecting, then rest of the things are again transported back to the donor. So basically we are taking very less amount of volume from that single patient by that apheresis technique. So we can collect more amount of platelet by apheresis technique, and it is termed as single donor platelets. So one single donor platelets is equal to 5 to 6 random donor platelets. But why we are not encouraging SDPs? Because we won't have that machine everywhere. So in advanced centers only, till now we are having this apheresis technique. But any day, apheresis SDP plasma is way better than RDP plasma. So what can be the indications of platelet? Any cause that is where the patient present with low number of platelets. Like low number of platelets, we tell it as thrombocytopenia. So when normal platelet count, any one of you can tell? 4 lakhs, very good. So if platelet count is low, it is termed as thrombocytopenia. And then in thrombocytopenia also some categories are there. If the patient is presenting with bleeding, any major or minor bleed, then platelet count less than 50,000 is also eligible for platelet transfusion. But without any bleeding, we can wait even till 10,000 platelet count also. After that, platelet concentration is indicated. So I already told what is the content of fresh frozen plasma. All the coagulation factors that are present in plasma is there. Extra plasma proteins and fibrinogens. Fibrinogen is also basically coagulation factor. So what can be the indication? So any situation where coagulation factors are deficient can be an indication for FFP transfusion. Like liver disease, DIC, massive transfusion, warfarin reversals, even factor deficiency. So factor 8 deficiency is known as, anyone if you know? factor 8 deficiency is known as hemophilia A. So in a given hemophilia A patient, the first treatment is factor 8. But then again, factor 8 is not available everywhere. Let's say in a very remote place of Tripura where factor 8 is not available, but by chance blood bank is available. So for the very urgent treatment, they can be given FFP if it is available. And cryoprecipitate, I have already discussed. So indication, as cryoprecipitate, main three factors present is fibrinogen and then factor 8 and von Willebrand factor. So in a patient with hypofibrinogenemia, where fibrinogen count is low, cryoprecipitate is indicated. So here take home message is one donation can treat 2 to 3 patients because we can get PRBCs from there, we can get platelets from there, we can get FFPs from there. Reduce risk of transfusion reaction, targeted therapy will ensure better patient outcomes and less exposure to unnecessary components and optimize storage and uses. Okay. So one case one. So we have one patient who is diagnosed to have dengue and platelet count is only 8,000 and they are having petechiae. So you have whole blood, you have platelets. What will you give to the patient? Platelets, very good. And another patient, one lady with postpartum hemorrhage. So she has bled continuously after delivery and hemoglobin came down to 5. So you have whole blood and you have PRBCs. Which one you will give? Whole blood? Why?
Blood volume is decreasing.
How do you know blood volume? Hemoglobin is, if you have whole blood and PRBCs, then you will give which one? You will prefer PRBC, no? Because I have not mentioned, but let's say her hemoglobin is normal, her WBC count is normal. So if we have PRBCs, we'll give PRBC. Because already she is in a volume depletion state. So if I give whole blood, already we are giving too many plasmas and there are reaction chances are more. So maybe we'll give normal saline along with we'll give only PRBCs. We don't need other things, no plasma proteins, we don't wish to give plasma. Okay. So here we will give platelet concentration, and in a patient with anemia, if we have access to PRBCs, first we will try with PRBCs. So the fourth part is process of transfusion. So more or less we have discussed, we just recapitulate. So administration of whole blood or its components to restore the oxygen carrying capacity, to restore the volume or to restore the specific functions, we are giving blood transfusion. Again indications, we will skip that part, components, pre-transfusion procedure. So this also I have discussed. In pre-transfusion, we need to assess donor, that I have discussed. Now we need to assess the recipient. So after some request is coming into the blood bank, so the doctor or whoever is responsible in the blood bank, first they will confirm the indication that I have received one requisition, but whether it is sure, whether I am sure that the patient needs blood transfusion. Rule out alternatives. Like sometimes one young girl, just I am giving one example, one young girl is coming with let's say 6.5 gram percentage of hemoglobin, and by the grace of God they don't have any bleeding. I am not seeing any bleeding. So, and they are giving history that she had a massive period bleeding maybe some months back. Her diet history is not good. She is not eating properly. If I have the iron profile report with me, I can see she is suffering from severe iron deficiency anemia. So maybe I can first try with iron supplementation. First I can start with iron supplementation, see the response in 2 to 3 days, whether she is improving or she is deteriorating. Maybe I can skip the blood transfusion in this patient. So like that we must see whether other alternatives are available. Like say in a CKD patient, in chronic kidney disease patient, hemoglobin is coming 6.9, 7, where we know that erythropoietin deficiency is one of the major causes. Maybe in that patient we can first administer erythropoietin injections to see if they are improving. But of course, as Sir also told, that we must weigh the situation. No, risk versus benefit. It's not always that in the book it is written hemoglobin less than 7 means we go ahead with that transfusion. So we need to assess the patient, whether we can wait, we can see that if the girl improves with iron therapy, if the CKD patient improves with erythropoietin therapy. So first we need to confirm the indication, and we must check whether any other alternatives from the blood transfusion is available or not. So once we have confirmed the indication, Then we'll do sample collection. So sample collection, why? For knowing what blood group is the recipient. So EDTA collection should be properly labeled at bedside itself, and 2 identifiers are mandatory for for any blood collection, for any blood testing also. Always make a practice to go ahead with 2 identifiers, not only patient name, because same name, once you start going to clinics, you will find same name, 2-3 patients are there with the same name, same surname. So always 2 identifiers. Even age is also can be same, no? So but the UID number, the MRD number, the hospital number, this will be definitely be different. So always go ahead with 2 identifiers for any given scenario. So what will be the lab testing for the recipient blood? So we should know what is the ABO blood grouping, what is the RH blood grouping. Otherwise, how are we going to select that which blood bag I am giving to the patient? The antibody screen, that is also one major point, and actually antibody screen and cross matching, this itself is a class. So I am sure you will learn subsequently. So this cross matching is also very, very important between the donor blood and the recipient blood. So once we know the blood grouping of the recipient, so we'll search. So first we'll see, okay, recipient blood group is A positive and the recipient need, let's say, PRBC. So I am going to give a call to my storage department whether we have A positive PRBCs. So if they are telling me that yes, we have 3 or 4 bags. So we'll start cross matching one by one with these 2 or 3 bags, whichever I have available in my storage. So once it is a good indication that there is no cross matching between donor and recipient blood, no major cross matching, no minor cross matching, after that we can go ahead with the blood bag. Then infection screening is also done at the blood bank. So infection screening of that storage blood, whatever blood I have storage, before giving to the patient, I will run a infection screen on that blood. So what are the things that must be included in the doctor requisition? Which component is required? What volume or dose they want us to give? How much is the urgent? Because you might be having 3 A positive bloods and there are 4 or 5 requisitions. So which one is more urgent? Which one you can delay maybe till evening, maybe till next day you can delay. So all these things we must discuss with the doctors, whoever is given the requisition. Clinical details or any previous transfusion history. So all these things are very important. So before we are issuing from the blood bank the blood, we must be very, very sure that it is compatible. The donor's blood and recipient blood is compatible. Issue slip, then you must check for expiry, because if you do Google search now, many a times it has happened. No, in some institutions that one expiry blood has gone to the recipient. So all these things, it's better 2 or 3 different individuals keep on checking whether the expiry date is there, bag integrity is maintained, any leaks are there, whether the color, usually the FFP color is yellow. So if you see any stark difference in the coloring, then we must think that something might have gone bad. Any clots, any visual clots, that by chance I am seeing the PRBCs and I am seeing that there is a clot. Maybe the anticoagulant has not worked, but what I can see by my naked eyes, I must check it very nicely, whether we can see any visual clots, whether if there is any color leak, if there is any change in the color. So all these things must be checked, labeling must be checked, expiry date must be checked. After that only we issue the blood bag from our blood bank. So the doctor's order will reach the blood collection team, and then we will check the patient identity by 2 identifiers. We will check the component very meticulously for blood grouping, if the blood grouping is correct, if the expiry is there, no leak, no color change, vital signs of the patient's baseline vital signs are okay. Then we will start the transfusion very slowly. So first few minutes of the blood transfusion should be very, very slow, because most of the immediate reactions will be occurring in the first few minutes only. Close monitoring for any reactions. Continue the blood transfusion at the prescribed rate. Complete within recommended time, and after the transfusion is finished also, post-transfusion vitals also we should check. And documentation I have written last, but this is the first thing that we must ensure that documentation is correct. So in patient identifier, I told about 2 identifiers, so full name, hospital number, blood group, all these things should be checked once, twice, thrice maybe, because wrong patient giving a wrong blood to a wrong patient is a very fatal, life-threatening error. So all these pre-transfusion vitals we can check in the recipient, his or her pulse rate, blood pressure, temperature, SpO2 level, respiratory rate. So we'll, for first 10 minutes or 15 minutes, we'll start very, very slowly and we'll keep on checking for any reactions. No reactions means after that we can increase the rate a bit more. So for administering the blood, we can use 1820G IV cannula, and for IV sets, only the IV sets that has been used for maybe for normal saline, only for normal saline, not the one for dextrose, not the one for Ringer's lactate, because in that case the blood can show hemolysis. So only the tubings with normal saline can be given with blood transfusion. So this is the usual time limit, but again it might be different in a patient to patient scenario. So the clinicians, they will guide us that at what rate they want the blood to be transfused, but usually it is for PRBC it is 2 to 4 hours, platelets 20 to 30 minutes. These are for adult. Obviously for pediatric population it will change according to their body weight. Monitoring and transfusion reaction, we should monitor the vitals before start of transfusion, after 15 minutes, halfway, and definitely at end of the transfusion. So some of the acute transfusion reactions we'll discuss individually one by one. So what to do if any acute transfusion reactions are happening? So the first step is stop the transfusion immediately. Okay, so sometimes you are giving later in your clinical experiences, sometimes maybe you are giving rounds to another patient in another bed, you are seeing that one blood transfusion is going on, suddenly you are seeing that the recipient is shivering. So you will call other helping hands later, you will first go and stop the transfusion. Okay, so you will, in the IV tubings, so there is one click button, so you will first stop the transfusion. Then the same IV line we can give NS, normal saline, but only NS, not dextrose, not Ringer lactate. So basically all these things are IV salines that I am telling, no, dextrose solution, Ringer lactates, normal saline. So first we can only give normal saline. Then you inform the blood bank, any nursing staffs available or the doctors from the blood bank, then you inform them. Send back not only the bag, this is also very important because this reaction need to be investigated nicely. So for the investigation we need all the components, or not only the blood bag. So the blood bag, the tubing and patient sample, the recipient sample, all these things should be returned to blood bank. Manage ABC of the patient. ABC is airway, breathing, circulation. In any emergency, the first step is to manage ABC of the patient. Then treat based on reaction. Whatever reaction has happened, try to treat it and document in his copy that what reaction has happened. Because in next transfusion, maybe this documentation is going to help him or her. So the documentation of the adverse reaction is also equally important. So post-transfusion monitoring, vitals should be seen like pulse rate, blood pressure, urine output and any other symptoms that the recipient is feeling that should be seen. So what we can document, so what component we have used in the recipient, unit number, how much volume we have infused and what was the start time, what was the ending time, any reaction, and then the signature of the concerned authority. Again for disposal also, biohazard guidelines should be followed, shard disposal, bag insertion, so it should all be followed according to our biomedical waste rules. So take home message for this is correct patient should be given correct blood. So not giving blood is good than giving a wrong blood. Okay. Then baseline vital should be monitored before the transfusion process, halfway transfusion, at the end of the transfusion, and first few minutes, 10 minutes or so is the drop rate should be very, very slow. Stop immediately if we see any reaction. So call for help later, but first you stop the transfusion. And NS normal saline is the only compatible fluid. So in our hurry, so I am seeing dextrose solution just beside the bed. I am giving dextrose. No, this is a very, very wrong practice. Even if you don't see normal saline, you go to nursing station, you bring one normal saline and then you infuse it. But only normal saline. Complete the transfusion within recommended time if there is no untoward reactions. This is the last part of today's discussion. I'm sure all of you are very tired. So we'll finish quickly. So complications. So what is a transfusion reaction? So it is an undesirable event occurring during or after transfusion of blood or its components related to the transfusion. So blood transfusion is definitely a frequent practice, but we don't see complications that much. But whenever it is happening, it is very, very urgent and it needs immediate attention. Because blood transfusion, we are giving it as a part of treatment. We should not add to his patient misery more. So advances in transfusion medicine have made blood transfusion even safer, but a risk of reaction still exists. And early recognition and prompt management is important. So basically it is divided into two part of reaction. So one is acute, that is happening within 24 hours of blood transfusion. One is delayed, that happens after 24 hours. So among the acute reactions, so first we'll discuss some of the acute transfusion reactions. So the first one is acute hemolytic transfusion reactions. The most important cause for this is ABO mismatch. So by chance say A positive patient, but mistakenly we are giving B positive blood. So what will happen in ABO mismatch? So we are having many complements in our body. So classical pathway of complement, alternative pathway of complement. So all these things we are going to learn in your physiology classes. So that complement system will get activated and it will give rise to intravascular hemolysis. So let's say in any anemia patient, you are giving blood to increase his or her hemoglobin, but by our mistake, so we are introducing hemolysis to the patient. So that is very wrong. So we should ensure twice, thrice that the same correct blood we are giving to correct patient. So what can be the clinical feature of acute hemolytic transfusion reaction? So the recipient will have fever, chills of fever, chest pain, back pain, their BP will suddenly drop. They will suffer from hypotension. And due to intravascular hemolysis, urine color will change. That's why you remember in the post-transfusion care, I told that we need to check vitals and also we need to ask the patient whether your urine color is same as you were passing before, whether the color has changed or not. That is also one good history point. So hemoglobinuria, they will have cola colored urine. In worst scenario, they can present with shock, DIC. So in investigation, so one very important investigation is Dirac-Combe test. That will show us positivity. So usually DCT should come negative, but if it is coming positive means it is a case of ABO incompatibility. That is one of the major acute reactions of blood transfusion. So in this scenario, what we can do? So how will you understand that we have given wrong blood to wrong patients? So again, we will take out samples from the recipient and we will perform blood grouping. So sometimes in blood grouping, whoever the person has done the blood grouping, so he or she thinking it is A positive but mistakenly written as B positive. So sometimes these things also happen. So repeat the blood grouping and cross matching to understand whether it is a case of ABO incompatibility. So treatment is same, stop the transfusion immediately, maintain the IV line with normal saline. If they are having low BP, then try to increase the blood pressure, and diuretics to maintain the urine output. And if they have developed DIC means disseminated intravascular coagulation. So whatever complications they are having, so we need to treat one by one. But first step is stop the transfusion and give normal saline. The second one and the most common one for a blood transfusion reaction is febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reaction. So you will remember I told from stored WBCs, cytokines are getting released, and those cytokines are actually responsible for febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reaction. So in advanced centers, so government is trying to incorporate that leukoreduction step in all the basic blood banks also, because by doing leukoreduction we can reduce the chances of febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reaction, because the main culprit is WBC for these so common complications. So if you can remove WBCs as much as possible, we are reducing the chance of the most common transfusion reaction. So febrile, so in the name itself febrile is there, so the recipient will present with fever. And how does it differentiate from acute hemolytic transfusion reaction? There is no hemolysis. It is only pure fever but without any hemolysis. Stop transfusion for fever, you give antipyretics, and this one, leukodepleted components by the leukoreduction, those filters, they will help to prevent this complication. Sometimes allergic reactions might occur. So mild, moderate, severe. So high risk patient, who are the high risk ones for developing allergic reactions? Those are the IgA deficiency patients. Again, stop transfusion for allergy, you give antihistaminics. Transfusion associated circulatory overload. So I told now that if we keep on giving whole blood, there is a chance that the recipient will develop circulatory overload, and this chance is more among which population? Among elderly, among children patients, and patients with heart failure and kidney disease patients. So they have a more chance of developing transfusion associated circulatory overload. So they will present with high BP, respiratory distress, and raised jugular venous pressure. So once you start your clinic, you will know how to measure jugular venous pressure. So in TECO patients, the jugular venous pressure will be raised in the recipient. So by that we understand. So for management, because circulatory overload means what? Fluid is excess. So for removal of the fluid, we need diuretics. So this is basically one medicine that will increase the urine rate and thus reduce the volume overload. Another one is transfusion related acute lung injury. So one important thing is this complication occur within 6 hours of the transfusion, and it is related to some antigen antibody reactions, again associated with WBCs. Again associated with WBC, but it is recipient WBCs. So one differentiating point from TRELLY to TECO, the transfusion related acute lung injury and transfusion associated circulatory overload, is that in TECO there is volume overload. So the jugular venous pressure is increased. But in TRELLY, the transfusion associated acute lung injury, the JVP, jugular venous pressure, is normal. But the patient will present with sudden hypoxia. They cannot breathe normally because their lungs have gotten injured by the transfusion. So sometimes patient might need ventilation also, for respiratory support because they cannot breathe properly, these TRELLY patients. Sometimes bacterial contamination can occur. So I already told in platelet the chances are very high for the storage blood to get contaminated by bacteria. So if there is infection, again they will have high fever, rigors. So in infection we need to give broad spectrum antibiotics to combat the infection. Some of the other acute complications can be hyperkalemia, that I already told, that occurs in old stored blood. Why? Due to the potassium is getting leaked. And who are at high chances of developing this one? Because neonates, and in a case of massive transfusion or in chronic kidney disease patients also, there is a chance that the recipient might develop hyperkalemia. There can be hypocalcemia also. Then hypothermia. I told you, remember that the fresh frozen plasma that is stored in -30 degree, that must be thawed in a water bath for 37 degree before introducing it to the recipient. If you don't thaw it properly, they will feel cold. So recipient might develop hypothermia also. But what are the delayed transfusion reactions? So they occur usually after 24 hours to weeks, days or weeks later they can occur. So one is delayed hemolytic transfusion reaction. So this is also due to some immune response from minor RBC antigens. So hemolytic means anywhere you see hemolytic means RBCs are getting destroyed. So destroyed RBCs, we will see them in the form of bilirubin. So the bilirubin will be increasing. Like what happens in hemolytic disease of newborn also. There also hemolysis is happening, right? So, and the unconjugated bilirubin is very high. So whenever there is hemolytic reactions, so we will get increased unconjugated bilirubin. So high bilirubin is known as jaundice? Yes, very good. So there for acute hemolytic transfusion reaction, I told that Coombs test will be positive. Here in delayed also, Coombs test will be positive. So in management also supportive. So if BP is low, then you maintain the BP. If there is any additional infection, you give antibiotics. You again cross-match the blood, that what RBC antigens we have missed, and then you give blood. Another one is transfusion-associated graft versus host disease. So this is related to donor T cells, T lymphocytes. This is related to donor T lymphocytes. So for this prevention of this cells, so as we know that this graft versus host disease is due to donor T cells, so there must be some process that will reduce the donor T cells. So that process is known as irradiation. So in Hi-Fi centers, so there is process of irradiation of the donor blood. So by that the donor T cells will reduce, and by that we can reduce the chances of transfusion associated graft versus host disease. Another condition can be post-transfusion purpura. So this is due to HPA antibodies, and here what will happen, patient will develop severe thrombocytopenia 5 to 12 days of post-transfusion. So see the misery of the patient. So we are giving the blood to increase the hemoglobin. So rather than increasing hemoglobin, after 5 to 6 days, patient is presenting to the clinician again, this time with low platelets. So then again history taking is important. So if the recipient gives that, oh yes, I remember I have taken blood 5 days prior, 6 days prior, then the clinician might suspect it might be a case of post-transfusion purpura. So iron overload can also happen. So you know thalassemia is a disease where our bone marrow is involved. There is a genetic problem where the bone marrow cannot produce the adequate amount of hemoglobin. So to maintain the hemoglobin in thalassemia major patients, we need to continuously give them blood. So due to the continuous blood transfusions, they will develop iron overload. There are some drugs, so these are called chelation therapy. So these drugs will try to lower the iron level, the iron overload. Infection transmission, that is very important. So in Tripura itself, we have many thalassemia major patients who are receiving continuous blood since their birth, since 6 weeks, 6 months of their blood. Now they are having hepatitis B, hepatitis C infections, because does not matter by what method we are testing the donated blood, there is always a very less percentage of chance that the hepatitis B or C infection is in incubation period. So we are missing that infection, but after introducing this to the patient at a later life, they are presenting with hepatitis B or C infection. That is actually very sad for the patient. So management algorithm is similar for any of the transfusion reactions. We need to stop transfusion immediately, give normal saline, check patient ID and blood bag, inform the blood bank as well as the clinician, and send samples, the blood bag, the tubings, patient's urine sample, patient's blood sample, send everything back to blood bank so that they can investigate, and they, by this knowledge, they can reduce the chances that another patient will suffer from these things. So so for preventing, what can we do? Avoid clerical error. So blood grouping should be mentioned very correctly, and we must really issue the same correct part of blood bag that is intended to give to the patient. And try to use leukodepleted products in the facility wherever it is available. Irradiated products also to prevent graft versus host disease. So all these things. So bacterial screenings and also the other infection screenings we must do meticulously. The take home message here is, so the transfusion reactions, it can be acute or delayed. So acute one will appear less than 24 hours and the delayed one will appear after 24 hours. Most dangerous among them is acute hemolytic reactions. However, the most common one is febrile non-hemolytic blood reactions. Only normal saline is compatible during transfusion. First 15 minutes is very, very important. We must set the drop rate very, very low for first 10 to 15 minutes, and always stop transfusion immediately if you suspect any reaction, and then ask for help. So finally it is end, no more talk. Thank you for the patient hearing. Hopefully you now have a basic idea. I want to thank Dr. Deepak also for arranging this beautiful class for all of you.